The history of religion in the Near East, Europe, and the broader Mediterranean world is complex, particularly when examining Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism. These three religious traditions are often discussed together, yet their historical origins, development, and internal divergences span centuries and involve a wide array of social, political, and cultural factors. To understand their differences fully, it is crucial to distinguish terms carefully. Christianity is not a monolithic entity, but an umbrella term encompassing multiple branches, including Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and later Protestantism. Catholicism is one of these branches, emerging as the dominant institutionalized form of Christianity within the Roman Empire. Judaism, in contrast, predates both, with roots reaching back to the kingdoms of Israel and Judah in the first millennium BC. From a historical perspective, it is important to rely on documented evidence rather than theological interpretations or doctrinal claims. Sources for this period include Hebrew scriptures, Roman administrative records, Jewish historiographical works, such as those by Josephus, the New Testament writings, including letters of Paul and synoptic gospels, as well as early church council records, imperial decrees, and archaeological findings. These sources allow historians to trace the chronological divergence of these three traditions with precision. The earliest roots of Judaism lie in the tribal confederations of the Israelite peoples and their consolidation under the united monarchy of Israel and Judah. By the 1st century BC and AD, Jewish religious life had become highly codified, centered around the Torah, the temple in Jerusalem, and the priesthood. Christianity began within this Jewish context, initially as a sect that followed the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. These early Christians maintained Jewish practices while gradually developing distinctive beliefs and rituals. The divergence from Judaism intensified over the 1st century AD, particularly following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, when Jewish religious life reorganized around rabbinic authority and synagogues. Catholicism, as a distinct branch of Christianity, emerged several centuries later. It was not simply a theological evolution, but a process shaped by imperial politics, councils convened to address doctrinal disputes, and the consolidation of hierarchical authority under the Bishop of Rome. By the 4th and 5th centuries, Catholicism had formalized doctrines, liturgical practices, and a centralized system of governance, distinguishing it clearly from other Christian movements and from Judaism. Understanding the differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism, therefore, requires tracing multiple layers of historical change: the religious and political context of ancient Israel, the social and theological development of early Christian communities, and the institutionalization of Christianity under the Roman Empire. Each of these stages involved decisions, debates, and transformations that left tangible traces in historical documents. It is also essential to understand that these differences were not merely theological. They were social, cultural, and political. The inclusion of Gentile populations in early Christianity, the responses of Jewish authorities to new sects, and the role of Roman emperors in shaping the institutional church all contributed to divergences that were recorded contemporaneously. By analyzing these developments in a chronological framework, historians can reconstruct the emergence of distinct religious identities, providing a foundation for understanding the three traditions today. In this documentary-style analysis, we will follow a strictly historical narrative, moving sequentially through the periods that define the divergences. We will begin with the formation of Judaism, perceived through the life and teachings of Jesus, the expansion of early Christian communities, and the eventual institutionalization of Catholicism. The aim is to provide a coherent, fact-based account that demonstrates not only what these religions are today, but also how their differences developed in concrete historical terms. Finally, it is important to note that difference in this context refers to documented divergence in beliefs, practices, institutional organization, and social identity. While theological distinctions are often emphasized in religious teaching, a historically grounded account relies on evidence of actions, structures, and written records. For instance, decisions about Gentile inclusion in early Christianity are reflected in the Council of Jerusalem, c. 50 AD. Catholic hierarchical authority is formalized through the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. And Jewish adaptation after the temple destruction is documented in rabbinic writings emerging in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries AD. By focusing on these historical markers, this documentary-style narrative establishes a timeline of divergence that can be traced with confidence, allowing for a clear understanding of the historical differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism. The subsequent segments will follow this chronological structure, ensuring continuity, clarity, and historical accuracy while expanding on the social, cultural, and political dimensions of each stage. Judaism, the earliest of the three religions under discussion, has its historical roots in the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Archaeological evidence and textual records indicate that the Israelite peoples coalesced as distinct political and religious entities during the late 2nd millennium BC, with a monarchical system established in the 10th century BC. The earliest references to Israel appear in Egyptian inscriptions from the 13th century BC, while biblical records describe the establishment of the united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon. Though these accounts are not independently corroborated archaeologically for every detail. The historical kingdoms of Israel in the north and Judah in the south were the political and religious centers in which early Jewish practices developed. By the 9th and 8th centuries BC, the religious identity of Israel and Judah was increasingly codified around the worship of a single deity, Yahweh. Textual evidence from the Hebrew Bible indicates an evolving canon of laws, rituals, and narrative history, though scholars note that the texts were compiled over centuries. The Torah, consisting of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, contains legal codes, ritual instructions, and historical accounts that served as the foundation for religious observance. Archaeological findings from sites in Jerusalem, Samaria, and surrounding regions, including inscriptions and artifacts, demonstrate that sacrificial rites and ritual purity practices were central to worship. By the 6th century BC, the Babylonian conquest of Judah and the destruction of Solomon's temple in 586 BC were critical events in the consolidation of Jewish religious identity. The exile in Babylon resulted in the codification of laws, prayers, and communal practices that could survive without centralized temple worship. This period produced early forms of the synagogue as a local assembly for study and prayer, documented in later historical records, although precise archaeological dating for synagogues is limited to the post-exilic period. The Persian period, 539 to 332 BC, under Cyrus the Great, allowed Jewish communities to return to Judah and reconstruct the temple in Jerusalem. The Second Temple, completed circa 516 BC, became the religious and ritual center of Judaism. Historical sources, including the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus, described the temple as the focal point for sacrifices, festivals, and priestly administration. Temple rites included daily burnt offerings, seasonal festivals such as Passover and Yom Kippur, and observances of purity and law as outlined in the Torah. During the Hellenistic period following Alexander the Great's conquest, 332 BC, Jewish communities in Judea experienced external political pressure and cultural influence. The Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties ruled over the region at various times, influencing administration and trade while allowing local religious autonomy. The Maccabean Revolt, 167 to 160 BC, against the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes resulted in the rededication of the temple, an event recorded in the books of Maccabees and referenced in Josephus. This period saw the consolidation of priestly authority and a renewed emphasis on Torah observance, establishing a model of Jewish religious continuity that persisted into the Roman period. By the 1st century BC, Roman authority had extended over Judea, bringing it into the province of Syria and later directly under Roman prefects and client kings such as Herod the Great, 37 to 4 BC. Herod's reign involved major reconstruction of the Second Temple, which Josephus describes as a monumental architectural project. The temple remained the center of religious life, with the priesthood managing sacrifices, festivals, and interpretations of the Torah. Jewish religious practice was thus highly codified, combining ritual, legal observance, and centralized authority in the temple priesthood. During this period, several sects and movements emerged within Judaism, each with documented differences in practice, legal interpretation, and social engagement. The Pharisees emphasized adherence to the Torah and the oral traditions that would later form the basis of rabbinic law. They engaged with local synagogues, promoted study and interpretation of legal texts, and were influential in shaping community norms. The Sadducees, primarily composed of temple priests and aristocratic families, focused on temple rites and rejected oral traditions not explicitly written in the Torah. Their authority was concentrated in Jerusalem and the temple hierarchy, and they often collaborated with political authorities to maintain temple stability. Another documented group, the Essenes, is described in the writings of Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder. They lived in communal settlements, such as Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls have been discovered. Historical evidence shows they practiced ritual purity, strict dietary rules, and meticulous observance of the Torah, often withdrawing from the broader urban and political environment. The Zealots, active during the 1st century AD, are recorded by Josephus as a militant faction opposing Roman rule, advocating armed resistance to maintain Jewish autonomy and temple-centered religious practices. These sects were not mutually exclusive in terms of geography, but were defined by doctrinal and practical emphases. Pharisees engaged with urban and rural communities alike. Sadducees maintained temple ritual centrality. Essenes often secluded themselves in desert settlements, and Zealots focused on political resistance. The historical significance of these divisions is apparent in the context of early Christian development, as the teachings of Jesus emerged within this pluralistic Jewish environment. Early Christian followers would interact with Pharisaic synagogues, attend temple festivals, and participate in local ritual life, while also forming distinct assemblies for communal worship and instruction. By the end of the 1st century BC and the early 1st century AD, Jewish practice combined temple-centered worship with synagogue-based instruction and local observances of purity, festivals, and dietary law. Roman records describe Jewish communities maintaining legal autonomy under the Fiscus Judaicus, a tax imposed after the destruction of Jerusalem, and Jewish populations are noted across the Mediterranean, from Alexandria to Rome. Historical documents from Josephus and Philo of Alexandria illustrate that Jewish communities were highly organized, with local councils, priestly oversight, and an emphasis on textual study. The Second Temple period also saw the codification of certain religious texts. While the Hebrew Bible was not finalized in a modern sense, many of its components, including legal, prophetic, and historical books, were in circulation. Archaeological findings, including inscriptions and manuscripts, confirm the widespread use of written Torah, festival calendars, and temple regulations. Ritual purity, sacrificial procedures, and adherence to Sabbath laws were enforced with oversight from priestly and lay authorities, reflecting a structured religious system. The historical emergence of Christianity occurred within the Jewish context of early 1st century Judea, a province under Roman rule. Jesus of Nazareth, active approximately between 30 and 33 AD, is the central figure in this emergence. Contemporary Roman records do not detail his life extensively, but his existence is corroborated by Roman historians such as Tacitus and Jewish historian Josephus. Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews, circa 93 to 94 AD, refers to a figure named Jesus, described as a teacher, and the leader of a movement, whose followers continued after his execution under the prefect Pontius Pilate, 26 to 36 AD. The earliest historical evidence for the activities of Jesus comes primarily from New Testament texts, including the Synoptic Gospels and the letters of Paul. While these texts are theological in nature, they contain verifiable historical markers, including references to locations, political authorities, and social customs that align with archaeological and non-Christian sources. Jesus' ministry took place in Galilee and Judea, areas densely populated with Jewish communities. Roman administrative structures included the client kingship of Herod Antipas in Galilee and the prefecture of Pontius Pilate in Judea, under which local governance, taxation, and law enforcement were administered. During this period, Jewish society was highly structured around temple worship, Torah observance, and local synagogues. Jesus and his earliest followers were Jewish, observing the Sabbath, attending temple festivals in Jerusalem, and participating in ritual practices such as prayer and offerings. The presence of synagogues in towns like Capernaum and Nazareth provided local centers for study and assembly. Archaeological evidence confirms synagogue structures from this period, with inscriptions and mikvahs, ritual baths, indicating active ritual life. Historical records indicate that Jesus traveled extensively in Galilee and Judea, engaging in public teaching, itinerant preaching, and gatherings with small groups of disciples. The Gospels document that he taught in Aramaic, the vernacular of the region, and that he interacted with both rural populations and urban communities. Roman records of public gatherings in Judea note that assemblies were monitored due to political sensitivities, and Jewish authorities maintained oversight over public religious activities. The activities of Jesus included discussion and interpretation of the Torah. Historical markers indicate he engaged with Pharisaic teachings and debates over law, as evidenced in texts noting disputes over Sabbath observance, ritual purity, and interpretations of dietary regulations. These interactions suggest that his teachings were initially within the boundaries of Jewish discourse rather than a separate religion. His followers participated in temple activities, including pilgrimages for Passover and other festivals, which were documented in both Jewish and Roman records as large-scale social and religious events. The execution of Jesus occurred under the authority of Pontius Pilate, likely between 30 and 33 AD. Roman records, including Tacitus' Annals, circa 116 AD, corroborate that Jesus was executed by crucifixion, a standard Roman method for political and social dissidents. Josephus notes that Jesus was condemned under Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, 14 to 37 AD. This event marked a critical point in the formation of early Christian identity, as followers of Jesus continued to meet and observe religious practices distinct from broader Jewish society, although initially they maintained Jewish law observance. Early Christian worship during this period was primarily organized around household gatherings, known in contemporary documents as oikoi. These small assemblies allowed followers to share meals, pray, and discuss teachings attributed to Jesus. Archaeological evidence of domestic spaces in Judea supports the plausibility of such gatherings, including identifiable storage areas for communal meals and small ritual spaces. The practice of communal meals, including the ritualized sharing of bread and wine, developed within these domestic contexts. Historical documents, particularly the letters of Paul written later, circa 50 to 60 AD, reference these practices as part of the emerging Christian observances. During the ministry of Jesus, followers were called disciples, typically 12 in number, as recorded in multiple sources. These individuals traveled with him, observed his teachings, and participated in local ritual life. Their activities included public teaching, engagement with Jewish authorities, and attendance at festivals in Jerusalem. Historical markers in Josephus' writings and Roman administrative records show that large gatherings in Jerusalem, particularly during Passover, were closely monitored due to the potential for unrest. The spread of Jesus' teachings within Galilee and Judea occurred in a context of competing Jewish sections. Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots each maintained documented practices and interpretations of the Torah. Jesus' followers were documented as interacting primarily with Pharisaic and general Jewish audiences, participating in synagogue teachings while also forming distinct assemblies for instruction in his teachings. Archaeological evidence indicates that synagogues were functional centers for study and assembly, often including mikvahs and seating arrangements conducive to discussion and debate. By 33 AD, the execution of Jesus resulted in a decentralized continuation of the movement. Followers returned to local communities, continuing worship in synagogues and private houses. Historical records note that Roman authorities maintained surveillance over emerging sects, including groups following Jesus, and occasional arrests and persecutions occurred. The continuity of Jewish practices among these followers is evidenced by documented adherence to Sabbath observance, participation in festivals, and dietary regulations during this period. Contemporary Roman sources, including Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, indicate that by the early decades of the 1st century AD, a group identified as Christians existed, distinguished by their devotion to Jesus of Nazareth, meeting in private homes and maintaining certain practices consistent with Jewish law. The distinction between this group and broader Judaism, however, remained minimal during Jesus' lifetime. Archaeological evidence, including ossuaries and inscriptions, confirms Jewish continuity in burial practices and ritual observance, which would have been shared by early Christian adherents at this stage. The recorded activities of Jesus show a consistent pattern of engagement with Jewish legal and ritual frameworks. His teachings, as documented in early texts, emphasized Torah observance, participation in temple rituals, and the performance of communal prayers. The documentation of interactions with Pharisees, attendance at Passover in Jerusalem, and participation in synagogue assemblies provides historical evidence that early Christianity did not initially constitute a separate religion, but emerged as a sect within the Jewish religious landscape. By the end of this period, small Christian communities were forming in Galilee and Judea. These groups continued to observe Jewish law while integrating teachings attributed to Jesus. The letters of Paul, written approximately 20 years later, provide historical confirmation of practices established during this period, including communal meals, house-based assemblies, and the observance of certain ritual laws. These letters also document the early distinction of this movement, as followers identified specifically with Jesus, marking the first step toward a separate religious identity while retaining Jewish ritual and social structures. Following the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, which occurred under the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate between 30 and 33 AD, his followers continued to organize into communities within Judea and Galilee. These early Christian communities retained Jewish ritual practices, including attendance at synagogues, observance of the Sabbath, participation in temple festivals, and adherence to dietary laws, while also forming small domestic assemblies for communal teaching, prayers, and shared meals. These gatherings, documented in the letters of Paul and other early Christian texts, provided the organizational framework for the movement before its expansion beyond the Jewish population. The documented shift toward Gentile inclusion began shortly after this period, facilitated primarily by the missionary work of Paul of Tarsus. Paul, also known as Saul, was an individual with Roman citizenship from the city of Tarsus in Cilicia. Historical records, including his own letters, particularly Galatians, 1 Thessalonians, and Romans, indicate that he began his missionary journeys in the mid-30s AD, approximately 5 to 10 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. Paul's travels focused on urban centers throughout the eastern Mediterranean, including cities such as Antioch, Philippi, Corinth, and Ephesus. These urban centers were part of the Roman provincial system, characterized by trade networks, administrative structures, and diverse populations. Paul's letters provide the primary historical evidence for his activities and for the inclusion of Gentile converts in early Christian communities. These letters indicate that Gentile converts were integrated into communities previously composed of Jewish followers of Jesus. One of the central issues during this period concerned the application of Torah law to Gentile converts. Specifically, questions arose regarding circumcision, dietary laws, and observance of Jewish festivals. These disputes are referenced in Paul's letters and are corroborated by later historical documentation regarding the Council of Jerusalem. The Council of Jerusalem, estimated to have occurred circa 50 AD, represents a documented milestone in early Christian history. Sources include Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul, particularly Galatians 2 verses 1 to 10. At this assembly, leaders of the movement, including James, the brother of Jesus, and Peter, one of the original disciples, deliberated on whether Gentile converts were required to observe the entirety of the Torah. The council concluded that Gentiles were not required to undergo full circumcision or adhere to all ritual prescriptions, but were expected to observe certain key requirements, including abstention from idolatry, sexual immorality, and consumption of blood. This decision formalized a divergence from mainstream Jewish law for Gentile members of the Christian movement while maintaining Jewish observance for Jewish followers. Historical records indicate that this period of Gentile inclusion also involved the establishment of organizational structures within the early Christian communities. Paul's letters document the appointment of elders, overseers, and deacons to manage local assemblies, coordinate communal meals, and oversee teaching. House churches, or oikoi, served as central locations for worship, prayer, and instruction. Archaeological evidence, including domestic structures in Roman provincial cities, supports the plausibility of such gatherings, as these buildings contained sufficient space for communal assemblies and ritualized meals. The expansion to Gentiles was facilitated by the urban context of the Roman Empire, which provided infrastructure and trade networks enabling travel and communication across large distances. Historical evidence indicates that Roman roads, ports, and sea routes allowed itinerant teachers like Paul to establish connections among dispersed communities. In addition, the use of Koine Greek as a lingua franca enabled correspondence and instruction across ethnically and linguistically diverse populations. Paul's letters, written in Greek, document the dissemination of teachings and administrative instructions to multiple communities, providing contemporary evidence of organizational and doctrinal development. Interactions between Jewish and Gentile Christians during this period are documented in the letters of Paul. Conflicts over Torah observance, particularly circumcision, were significant sources of debate. In Galatians 5 verses 2 to 12, Paul references opposition from certain groups who advocated for the circumcision of Gentiles, emphasizing the distinction between Jewish law and faith-based inclusion. Historical interpretation of these letters suggests that the resolution of these conflicts established precedents for divergent practices within the movement, facilitating a dual system in which Jewish Christians maintained Torah observance while Gentiles followed adapted requirements. Early Christian worship during this period continued to emphasize communal meals, prayer, and teaching. The letters of Paul refer to gatherings on specific days, such as the first day of the week, Sunday, which were distinguished from the traditional Jewish Sabbath, Saturday. These assemblies included the sharing of bread and wine in a ritual context, as referenced in 1 Corinthians 11 verses 23 to 26. While these practices were integrated within domestic settings, they reflected continuity with Jewish ritualized meals and communal gathering structures. Roman authorities documented instances of social unrest associated with new religious movements during this period. While early Christian communities were largely small and decentralized, they were occasionally subject to surveillance and local restrictions. Josephus, writing in Antiquities of the Jews, references disturbances in Judea and notes that Roman governance maintained oversight over groups perceived as potentially subversive. There is no indication that early Christian assemblies at this stage posed significant political threats, but the presence of both Jewish and Gentile members introduced new organizational complexities, requiring internal governance and external awareness. By 50 AD, the Gentile mission had produced significant numerical growth in multiple regions. Cities such as Antioch, described by historical texts as a major center of commerce and cultural exchange, became hubs for early Christian communities that included both Jewish and Gentile members. Archaeological evidence from the region, including inscriptions and communal spaces, supports the existence of organized assemblies and social cohesion. The integration of Gentiles required adaptation of ritual and teaching, leading to documented modifications of previous practices while retaining continuity with the movement's origins. The Council of Jerusalem also set precedents for subsequent decision-making processes within the movement. Leadership was exercised by a combination of original apostles, local elders, and itinerant missionaries. Historical documents indicate that decisions were recorded and disseminated, influencing observance and practice across multiple communities. The resolution of Gentile inclusion established a framework for the continued expansion of Christianity into the wider Roman world, while maintaining identifiable markers of Jewish origin in ritual and belief. The letters of Paul and other early Christian texts also document the formation of community regulations, including prohibitions on certain foods, sexual conduct, and idolatrous practices. These regulations were enforced through local elders and communal accountability, providing cohesion within diverse assemblies. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence from urban centers across Asia Minor, Greece, and Syria indicates that communities maintained identifiable meeting spaces, shared resources, and coordinated instruction, confirming the historical development of organizational structures. During 33 to 50 AD, early Christian worship remained closely tied to Jewish frameworks. Followers observed Jewish festivals and ritual practices while also gathering in private houses for instruction and communal meals. Gentile inclusion, formalized by the Council of Jerusalem, required adaptations to these practices, leading to documented distinctions in observance. Historical evidence demonstrates that these developments were both deliberate and coordinated, resulting in the first substantial divergence between Jewish and Gentile followers and establishing the foundation for a separate religious identity. By the end of this period, the movement had spread to multiple Roman provinces, including Judea, Galilee, Syria, Cilicia, and parts of Greece. Paul's letters indicate that communities were interconnected through correspondence, travel, and standardized instructions. Assemblies were structured with appointed leadership, rules for communal participation, and ritualized observances. These documented practices demonstrate that early Christian worship during 33 to 50 AD evolved in response to both internal organizational needs and external social contexts, while remaining historically rooted in Jewish ritual and communal frameworks. By the mid-1st century AD, Judea was under Roman provincial rule, following the incorporation of the region into the Roman Empire in 6 AD. Roman oversight included taxation, military presence, and administrative control through prefects and client rulers, including Herod the Great's successors. Jewish society in this period maintained distinct religious and social structures, with the Second Temple in Jerusalem serving as the central institution for ritual, legal, and communal life. The temple, rebuilt under the Persian authorization circa 516 BC and later expanded under Herod the Great, 37 to 4 BC, functioned as the hub of sacrifices, festival observances, and priestly administration. Early Christian communities in Judea continued to observe Jewish law and temple-centered rituals while also gathering in domestic assemblies for instruction, communal meals, and prayer. Archaeological and textual evidence indicate that these house churches operated in urban and rural areas, accommodating small groups of followers, as documented in Paul's letters and later Christian sources. The presence of the temple provided the setting for pilgrimages, festivals, and assembly, which early Christians, as Jewish adherents, participated in while maintaining distinctive gatherings for teaching. Tensions between Jewish populations and Roman authorities escalated in the decades preceding 70 AD. Historical records, particularly Josephus' The Jewish War, written 75 AD, document instances of tax revolts, armed resistance, and political unrest, including the emergence of zealot factions advocating for independence from Roman rule. These conflicts culminated in the First Jewish-Roman War, beginning in 66 AD, which Josephus details extensively. The Roman response, under generals such as Vespasian and later his son Titus, involved systematic military campaigns against rebellious Jewish towns and fortifications. The Siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD was a documented turning point. Josephus provides an extensive account of the Roman strategy, the construction of siege works, and the eventual breach of the city walls. Roman legions employed battering rams, towers, and circumvallation techniques, systematically reducing resistance within the city. Contemporary Roman administrative records confirm the deployment of multiple legions and the imposition of extraordinary military measures to suppress the revolt. The destruction of the Second Temple, carried out by Titus in August 70 AD, was a decisive event in Jewish history. Josephus documents the burning of the temple, the looting of its treasures, and the collapse of the temple structure. Roman coins and inscriptions from the period commemorate the victory over Judea, providing corroboration of the event from an imperial perspective. Archaeological evidence in Jerusalem, including ash layers, collapsed masonry, and destruction debris, aligns with these textual sources, confirming the historical record. The destruction of the temple had profound implications for Jewish religious practice. With the cessation of sacrificial rites and priestly administration at the temple, Jewish communities shifted towards synagogue-centered worship and rabbinic authority. Legal interpretations, liturgical readings, and communal assemblies increasingly took place outside the temple precincts. Written texts and codifications of the Torah, including discussions recorded in early rabbinic literature, reflect the adaptation to temple absence, with emphasis on prayer, study, and observance of festivals and local assemblies rather than centralized sacrificial rites. Early Christian communities, already observing Jewish law and temple-based festivals, were directly affected by the destruction. Historical evidence indicates that followers of Jesus, as documented in the letters of Paul and other early texts, increasingly shifted their communal gatherings to domestic settings. House-based worship, prayer, and teaching became the primary modes of religious life. The cessation of temple sacrifice did not immediately alter these communities' adherence to Jewish law, but did necessitate logistical and ritual adaptations. The Roman destruction also catalyzed distinctions between Christian and Jewish practices. By 70 AD, Christians had already begun establishing separate observances for key festivals. The letters of Paul, including 1 Corinthians and Galatians, reference assemblies on the first day of the week, separate from the Sabbath, indicating a divergence from traditional temple-centered practice. Archaeological evidence from domestic worship sites in Judea and the broader Mediterranean supports this transition, showing designated spaces for prayer and communal meals that replaced temple attendance. The historical record further documents that the destruction of the temple intensified the organization of Christian communities. With the temple gone, Jewish Christians increasingly relied on appointed leaders, such as elders and overseers, to maintain ritual observance, communal cohesion, and instruction. Paul's correspondence, dated from the mid-50s to 60s AD, documents the formalization of roles within communities, including guidance on ritual meals, moral conduct, and dispute resolution. These developments indicate the adaptation of worship practices to a post-temple context while retaining Jewish ritual foundations. Roman administration documented the aftermath of the siege in terms of taxation, property redistribution, and population displacement. Josephus notes that Jerusalem's population was significantly reduced due to death, enslavement, and exile. Despite these disruptions, both Jewish and Christian communities maintained continuity through smaller, decentralized assemblies. The surviving Jewish population emphasized textual study, Sabbath observance, and synagogue participation, while Christian groups consolidated domestic gatherings as the primary locus of worship. The destruction of the temple also affected the material culture of worship. Priestly garments, temple utensils, and sacrificial instruments were destroyed or looted, eliminating the capacity for traditional ritual. Archaeological records, including temple debris and inscriptions, corroborate this. Christian practices, which had previously been supplementary to temple observance, increasingly focused on liturgical structure within homes, including the ritual sharing of bread and wine, prayer, and instruction. This development is documented in the letters of Paul and in early Christian texts describing communal assemblies. The consolidation of Christian identity during this period was further facilitated by the dispersion of communities due to Roman military campaigns. Followers spread to cities throughout the Roman Empire, including Syria, Asia Minor, and Greece. Paul's letters indicate that these dispersed communities retained common ritual structures, including weekly gatherings, shared meals, and doctrinal instruction, demonstrating continuity of worship practices in the absence of a centralized temple. By the late 1st century AD, Jewish and Christian communities had undergone significant institutional differentiation. Jewish communities relied on rabbinic authority and synagogue networks to maintain law observance, study, and ritual continuity. Christian communities relied on domestic assemblies, appointed leadership, and standardized communal practices. Archaeological evidence, including house church remains and inscriptions, provides physical corroboration of this transition. The destruction of the Second Temple, therefore, represents a historically documented inflection point. It marked the end of centralized sacrificial practice for Judaism and accelerated the formal separation of early Christian communities from the temple-centric framework. Historical documents, Roman records, and archaeological evidence collectively established the chronology, scale, and implications of this event. Christian worship, while initially integrated within Jewish observance, increasingly adapted to decentralized domestic structures, laying the foundation for practices that would define the movement in subsequent decades. Following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, Jewish religious life reorganized around rabbinic authority and synagogue-centered practices. Early Christian communities, already partially distinct from temple worship, further adapted their religious practices to decentralized domestic assemblies. These house churches became the primary centers of instruction, communal meals, and prayer. Archaeological evidence from urban centers in Judea, Asia Minor, and Syria indicates that early Christian assemblies took place in private residences with designated spaces for gatherings, supporting continuity of worship practices. The period from 70 to 313 AD saw significant diversity within Christianity. Historical documentation, including the letters of Paul, writings of Ignatius of Antioch, circa 110 AD, and later early Christian texts, records the coexistence of multiple strands of practice and belief. One documented distinction existed between Jewish Christians, who continued to observe Torah law and Jewish festivals, and Gentile Christians, whose practices had been adapted following the decisions of the Council of Jerusalem, c. 50 AD. Jewish Christians maintained participation in synagogue worship, prayer, and observance of dietary laws, while also gathering separately in domestic assemblies for teaching about Jesus. Gentile Christians, concentrated in urban centers across the Roman Empire, developed practices that reflected adaptations to Roman social and cultural contexts. Assemblies were organized in domestic spaces, often in upper-story rooms, to accommodate communal prayer, meals, and instruction. Paul's letters to communities in Corinth, Philippi, and Ephesus, circa 50 to 60 AD, document the structure of these gatherings, including the appointment of elders, presbyteroi, overseers, episkopoi, and deacons, diakonoi, responsible for maintaining communal order, teaching, and distribution of resources. Archaeological evidence from Roman provincial cities supports the plausibility of these house churches, with domestic architecture accommodating group gatherings and ritual meals. In addition to the Jewish and Gentile Christian communities, other groups with alternative theological emphases are documented. Gnostic Christian groups, referenced in texts such as those discovered at Nag Hammadi, though compiled later, they preserve earlier traditions, show that some communities emphasized secret knowledge, gnosis, for salvation. Early historians, including Irenaeus, c. 180 AD, describe these groups as distinct in belief and ritual from the mainstream assemblies, though archaeological evidence is limited. Similarly, sects described as Ebionites maintained strict Torah observance while rejecting Pauline interpretations, reflecting continued diversity within the Jewish Christian subset. Christian communities during this period were decentralized, lacking a unified hierarchy. Local assemblies appointed leadership to regulate teaching, manage communal funds, and coordinate ritual observance. Paul's letters document instructions for communal meals, ethical conduct, and discipline for members deviating from prescribed practices. House churches facilitated both instruction in the teachings attributed to Jesus and practical administration of communal life, including care for the poor and distribution of resources, which is documented in Romans 15 verses 25 to 27 and Acts 6 verses 1 to 6. Persecution by Roman authorities also shaped Christian practices. Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and Suetonius document the existence of Christians and sporadic prosecutions during this period. For example, Pliny the Younger, in a letter to Emperor Trajan dated circa 112 AD, details procedures for identifying Christians in Bithynia, including interrogation, opportunity for recantation, and execution for persistent refusal to worship Roman deities. These historical records demonstrate that Christian assemblies, though primarily private, were monitored by Roman authorities, influencing both the physical location of gatherings and the secrecy of worship practices. Liturgical practices during this period evolved within the decentralized framework. Historical documentation indicates that weekly assemblies were commonly held on the first day of the week, Sunday, reflecting early commemoration of Jesus' resurrection while distinguishing from the Jewish Sabbath, Saturday. Paul's letters, including 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2, provide evidence for the collection of resources and structured gatherings. The ritual sharing of bread and wine, referenced in 1 Corinthians 11 verses 23 to 26, demonstrates continuity in the adaptation of Jewish meal practices into specifically Christian rites. Theological diversity also influenced worship practices. Some communities emphasized prophetic instruction, while others focused on moral exhortation or interpretation of Scripture. Evidence from early Christian writings, including the Didache, circa late 1st or early 2nd century AD, provides instructions for ritual prayer, baptism, and communal meals. These texts describe practical procedures for conducting worship, selecting leaders, and managing disputes, confirming a structured approach to community life despite overall decentralization. By the 2nd century AD, Christian communities were geographically widespread, with documented presence in Asia Minor, Greece, Syria, North Africa, and Italy. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions, tombs, and dedicatory artifacts, supports the existence of organized Christian communities. Written evidence from early Christian apologists such as Justin Martyr, c. 100 to 165 AD, provides detailed descriptions of Sunday assemblies, prayer, reading of Scripture, and the ritual meal, confirming the historical continuity of worship practices from the 1st century foundations. The diversity of early Christianity included variations in baptismal practice. The Didache prescribes immersion or effusion depending on local conditions, while later sources indicate regional differences. Baptism functioned as a rite of initiation into the community, often accompanied by instruction in communal norms and ethical expectations. This ritual, documented consistently in early sources, provides evidence of a standardized but adaptable practice maintained across diverse communities. Leadership structures evolved to accommodate growing populations. Elders and overseers were responsible for doctrinal instruction, ritual oversight, and administrative duties, including the collection of communal funds and care for the poor. Paul's letters, written circa 50 to 60 AD, established criteria for leadership and ethical behavior, including the qualifications of bishops and deacons. Subsequent early Christian texts reinforce these roles, confirming continuity and consistency in organizational practice across geographically dispersed communities. The period also witnessed continued interaction with Jewish authorities. Jewish Christians maintained synagogue attendance, Torah observance, and ritual compliance while negotiating their distinct identity. Historical records from Josephus and Roman administrative sources document Jewish communities as distinct from Gentile populations, noting occasional tensions with local authorities. Christian groups, while initially integrated within Jewish society, increasingly differentiated through adapted rituals, Sunday assemblies, and leadership structures, a process that accelerated as communities spread throughout the Roman Empire. By 313 AD, early Christian worship had evolved significantly. The Edict of Milan, issued by Constantine and Licinius, legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Before this, the diversity of practices, decentralized leadership, and adaptation to local circumstances defined early Christian worship. Documented evidence from archaeological sites, inscriptions, and letters confirms that worship practices included regular assemblies for prayer, teaching, communal meals, and initiation rites, providing continuity from the first century foundations. Between 313 and 325 AD marks a critical phase in Christian history, defined by the formal legalization of Christianity within the Roman Empire and the subsequent establishment of imperial support for doctrinal unification and structural consolidation. Before 313 AD, Christian communities operated in a largely decentralized and at times persecuted framework, with worship conducted in domestic assemblies, catacombs, and other private locations. Archaeological evidence from this period indicates that Christian meeting spaces were modest and adapted to local conditions, often consisting of upper-story rooms, small halls, or subterranean galleries suitable for communal gatherings, prayer, and ritual meals. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313 AD by Emperor Constantine I and co-emperor Licinius, provided formal recognition and legalization of Christianity across the Roman Empire. Contemporary sources, including Lactantius de Mortibus Persecutorum and Eusebius' Life of Constantine, c. 337 AD, document the decree as granting Christians freedom to practice their religion openly, restoring previously confiscated property, and ensuring exemption from state-sanctioned persecution. This decree ended the sporadic but systemic imperial persecutions that had characterized the preceding 3 centuries, although regional enforcement of local laws and social pressures continued in certain areas. Following legalization, Christian communities experienced rapid organizational and structural development. The first major documented consequence was the emergence of more formalized leadership structures. Bishops, episkopoi, presbyters, presbyteroi, and deacons, diakonoi, assumed clearly defined administrative and liturgical roles within urban centers and provinces. Eusebius notes that Constantine corresponded with bishops, consulted them on legal matters affecting the church, and recognized their authority in managing property and overseeing liturgical practice. Domestic assemblies expanded into larger meeting halls or converted civic buildings, providing space for public worship, instruction, and communal administration. Archaeological evidence from early basilicas, such as those in Nicaea, Constantinople, and Rome, confirms the adaptation of Roman civic architectural forms for Christian assembly purposes. Liturgical practices during this period remained rooted in established patterns of prayer, communal meals, and teaching, while beginning to adapt to larger assembly spaces and public visibility. The ritual sharing of bread and wine, previously conducted in domestic house churches, continued as a central element of worship, now increasingly conducted in larger halls under the oversight of appointed clergy. Baptismal rites, including immersion and effusion, were administered publicly, often in baptismal pools or dedicated spaces within basilicas. Written sources, including the letters of Constantine and early liturgical texts preserved in Eusebius' ecclesiastical history, document the codification of these practices within legal and communal frameworks. One of the defining events of this period was the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, convened by Constantine to address theological disputes and unify doctrinal positions across the empire. Historical records, including the Nicene Creed and Eusebius accounts, document the attendance of approximately 300 bishops from across Roman provinces, representing both Eastern and Western communities. The council addressed the Arian controversy, which disputed the relationship between the Father and the Son and produced a codified statement of orthodox belief, the Nicene Creed, intended to standardize doctrine and promote cohesion within the Christian population. The Council of Nicaea also addressed administrative and liturgical matters. Canon law established that the council regulated the structure of episcopal authority, the administration of sacraments, and the scheduling of festivals, including Pacha, Easter. These documented regulations indicate a transition from decentralized house-based worship to coordinated, community-wide observances, integrating local assemblies under provincial and metropolitan episcopal oversight. Archaeological evidence of early churches from this period, including basilicas in Nicaea and Constantinople, aligns with textual records, demonstrating both architectural and organizational standardization. Imperial support following the Edict of Milan facilitated the construction and endowment of churches. Constantine personally funded basilicas in Rome, Jerusalem, and Antioch, as documented by Eusebius and confirmed by inscriptions. These buildings were designed to accommodate large congregations, with spaces for instruction, communal meals, baptism, and liturgical observance. The integration of Roman civic architectural elements, such as apses, naves, and atria, indicates the adaptation of existing public forms to meet the needs of Christian worship. The legalization of Christianity also allowed for the formal collection of resources to support clergy, charitable activities, and community administration. House-based assemblies were supplemented by public contributions, including imperial donations, land grants, and private patronage. Documents, including Eusebius' life of Constantine and inscriptions in early churches, record donations of property, funding for clergy stipends, and maintenance of assembly spaces. These developments established a sustainable administrative and liturgical infrastructure previously impossible under persecution. Christian worship during this period reflected both continuity and adaptation. While domestic assemblies had historically centered on teaching, communal meals, prayer, and baptism, legalized and publicly supported worship now included ritual processions, public readings of Scripture, and sermons delivered in basilicas. Written records indicate that Scripture readings included texts now recognized as canonical, providing uniformity across geographically dispersed communities. Baptismal and Eucharistic rites remained central, with clerical oversight ensuring adherence to codified practice. Regional diversity persisted, however, in both practice and calendar observance. The Council of Nicaea addressed the calculation of Easter, establishing a uniform method to reconcile differences between Alexandrian and Roman practice. This documentation confirms the continuing role of local tradition while asserting imperial and ecclesiastical authority in standardization. Bishops were tasked with enforcement and education regarding calendar observances, sacramental practice, and doctrinal conformity. The period between 313 and 325 AD also saw the formal integration of Christian communities into imperial legal structures. Constantine's correspondence and imperial edicts granted bishops judicial authority in civil disputes involving Christians, rights to administer charitable functions, and exemption from certain civic obligations. Legal codification ensured the security of property, continuity of worship, and authority of clergy over community life. Roman administrative records confirm these legal privileges, representing a shift from clandestine assemblies to recognized public institutions. The Nicene Creed, codified at Nicaea in 325 AD, served not only as a theological statement, but also as a unifying instrument for liturgical and doctrinal practice. The council's canons regulated the ordination of bishops, the relationship between metropolitan and suffragan sees, and the administration of church property. Written sources indicate that these regulations were disseminated through provincial networks, establishing a standardized framework for worship and governance. Archaeological evidence of basilicas, inscriptions, and episcopal buildings confirms the implementation of these organizational norms across the empire. The period also marks the transition from localized, house-based worship to large public assemblies with designated clergy, structured liturgies, and administrative oversight. Early Christian texts, including Eusebius' ecclesiastical history and letters from bishops of the period, document the expansion of Sunday worship, liturgical readings, and the Eucharist in large basilicas. Baptism continued to function as a rite of initiation, often in specialized spaces within church buildings. The expansion of assembly spaces allowed for wider participation while maintaining continuity with earlier practices of teaching, communal meals, and prayer. By 325 AD, Christianity had emerged as both legally recognized and organizationally structured within the Roman Empire. Imperial support under Constantine facilitated the standardization of doctrine, the construction of churches, public administration of worship, and the dissemination of canonical texts. Despite regional variation, historical evidence indicates continuity in ritual practice from earlier decentralized worship. Communal meals, baptism, prayer, and scripture reading remained central, now supported by public and administrative structures. The 4th and 5th centuries AD witnessed the consolidation of Christian communities into what would become the institutionalized church, later known as Catholicism. Following the legalization of Christianity through Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD and the establishment of doctrinal unity at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, Christian communities across the Roman Empire began formalizing hierarchical structures, liturgical practice, and legal codifications that distinguished them from other Christian movements and secular institutions. Historical documentation from this period, including imperial correspondence, council canons, and ecclesiastical histories, provides the primary evidence for these developments. By the early 4th century, bishops in major urban centers, particularly Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, had acquired significant administrative and liturgical authority. Letters from Constantine and other emperors, as recorded in Eusebius' Life of Constantine, c. 337 AD, demonstrate that bishops were recognized as authoritative intermediaries between imperial administration and local Christian communities. Their responsibilities included oversight of doctrinal instruction, coordination of liturgical practice, management of church property, and adjudication of disputes within the community. The concentration of authority in these urban episcopal sees laid the foundation for the later papacy. The Bishop of Rome gradually emerged as a central figure due to the historical association of the city with Peter and Paul, as documented in early ecclesiastical writings, including Irenaeus against heresies, c. 180 AD, and later sources. By the 4th century, correspondence and synodal records show that the Roman bishop exercised both symbolic and practical authority over other episcopal sees. This authority was reinforced through participation in councils, imperial recognition, and the accumulation of legal and material resources. Documents. including the canons of regional synods, demonstrate the growing role of the Roman bishop in maintaining doctrinal conformity and regulating liturgical practice across provinces. The consolidation of Catholic liturgy and sacraments during the 4th and 5th centuries is well documented. The ritual practices of baptism, Eucharist, and prayer had existed since the earliest house churches, but this period formalized their administration and integrated them into public worship in basilicas and other dedicated spaces. Early liturgical manuals, including the Apostolic Constitutions, c. late 4th century AD, provide detailed instructions for the conduct of services, the roles of clergy, and the sequence of readings and prayers. Baptism was typically conducted in dedicated baptismal pools or fonts within church buildings, while the Eucharist followed prescribed prayers and ritualized procedures administered by ordained clergy. The emergence of Catholicism also involved the formalization of canon law. Councils, synods, and episcopal correspondence codified regulations regarding clerical conduct, disciplinary measures, administration of sacraments, and property management. The Council of Sardica, 343 AD, for example, documented procedures for the ordination of bishops and adjudication of disputes. Imperial edicts, including those issued by Constantine, Constantius II, and Theodosius I, reinforced these regulations by granting legal authority to the clergy and ensuring protection of church property. Such measures created a standardized framework that distinguished the institutionalized church from local, independent Christian communities or heterodox groups. By the mid-4th century, the construction of public basilicas and other ecclesiastical buildings provided architectural and spatial reinforcement of centralized worship. Archaeological evidence, including the remains of the old St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, construction begun 324 AD, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, c. 327 AD, and Constantinople's Hagia Sophia predecessor, c. 360 AD, indicates that these structures were designed to accommodate large congregations, provide space for sacraments, and facilitate clergy-led services. The design elements of naves, apses, and atria allowed for orderly assembly, processional movement, and spatial hierarchy reflecting clerical authority. Liturgical uniformity became increasingly documented through council decisions and episcopal letters. The councils of Constantinople, 381 AD, and Ephesus, 31 AD, addressed theological disputes, standardized creedal formulations, and regulated observances of festivals, including Easter. Canonical rulings established procedures for the ordination of deacons, presbyters, and bishops, as well as rules for the administration of charity and communal resources. These actions demonstrate continuity with earlier Christian practices while formalizing structures and norms that reinforced centralized ecclesiastical authority. The integration of imperial authority into the Church's institutional framework also shaped its emergence as a dominant religious body. Theodosius I, through the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD, declared Nicene Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Roman legal records document the enforcement of orthodoxy, including the suppression of heretical groups and the regulation of worship practices. Bishops were entrusted with oversight of doctrinal conformity, resolution of disputes, and enforcement of canon law. These measures facilitated the transformation of Christianity from a diverse, decentralized movement into a legally and socially dominant institution. Christian worship practices during this period retained continuity with earlier traditions while adapting to public and imperial contexts. Sunday assemblies, previously conducted in house churches, now took place in basilicas with clerical leadership, structured prayers, and formalized liturgy. Eucharistic celebrations were administered according to standardized procedures, and baptismal rites were conducted publicly to incorporate new converts into the community. The codification of ritual allowed for consistent practice across geographic regions, reinforcing the authority of bishops and synodal structures. The emergence of Catholicism also involved the integration of charitable and educational functions. Bishops administered almsgiving, coordinated care for the poor, and oversaw instruction in Christian doctrine. Written records from councils and episcopal correspondence indicate that the administration of charity was codified alongside liturgical and doctrinal responsibilities, providing an organized framework for social and religious cohesion. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions and dedicatory plaques, confirms the allocation of property and resources for these purposes. By the 5th century AD, Catholicism had achieved both doctrinal and structural consolidation. The hierarchical system of bishops, presbyters, and deacons regulated ritual, instruction, and community administration. Sacraments, including baptism, Eucharist, and confirmation, were formally codified and conducted in designated ecclesiastical spaces. Canon law provided legal and administrative authority, while imperial endorsement reinforced the Church's social and political position. The combination of doctrinal codification, hierarchical authority, and imperial recognition distinguished Catholicism from other Christian movements and established it as the dominant institutional form of Christianity within the Roman Empire. The formalization of the papacy during this period was particularly significant. The Bishop of Rome, recognized as the successor to Peter according to early ecclesiastical tradition, exercised authority over disputes among other bishops, issued doctrinal rulings, and coordinated responses to heretical movements. Letters from bishops, synodal decisions, and imperial correspondence demonstrate the practical implementation of papal authority, including mediation of disputes, validation of episcopal appointments, and oversight of ecclesiastical property. This consolidation provided continuity with earlier Christian leadership structures while establishing a centralized authority that would persist throughout the Middle Ages. By the close of the 5th century AD, Catholicism had achieved a standardized liturgical framework, hierarchical governance, and legal recognition throughout the former Roman territories. Worship practices, including Sunday assemblies, Eucharistic rites, baptism, and public prayer, were codified and integrated into public ecclesiastical buildings. Bishops exercised authority over doctrine, ritual, and administration, supported by imperial law and council decisions. The combination of historical continuity from early Christian worship, structural consolidation, and imperial recognition defines the emergence of Catholicism as a distinct, institutionalized branch of Christianity. The historical relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism can be traced through a series of key chronological events and institutional developments spanning from the 1st century AD to the 5th century AD. This timeline comparison provides a documented framework for understanding how each tradition evolved, maintained worship practices, and diverged institutionally. Archaeological evidence, contemporary writings, letters, and Roman administrative records form the basis of this historical reconstruction. Judaism, continuity and adaptation, before 1st to 5th century AD. Judaism predates both Christianity and Catholicism and maintained a continuous religious framework centered on the Torah, temple worship, and later synagogue practice. By the 1st century AD, Jewish religious life was organized around the Second Temple in Jerusalem, rebuilt under Persian authority, 516 BC, and expanded under Herod the Great, 37 to 4 BC. Temple practices included sacrificial rites, festival observances, and priestly administration, with the high priest holding both religious and, in some instances, political authority. Jewish sectarian diversity was documented in the 1st century AD. The Pharisees emphasized oral interpretation of the Torah, legal observance, and participation in synagogue worship. The Sadducees, largely composed of the priestly elite, focused on temple rituals and rejected oral traditions not codified in the Torah. The Essenes, as recorded by Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, c. 93 to 94 AD, maintained ascetic communal life and preserved written texts, often in separate settlements. The Zealots advocated for armed resistance to Roman rule, contributing to political tensions that culminated in the Jewish Revolt, 66 to 70 AD. The destruction of the Second Temple by Roman forces under Titus in 70 AD was a pivotal moment documented in Josephus, The Jewish War, 75 AD. Temple destruction eliminated centralized sacrificial worship, accelerating the transition of Judaism to synagogue-centered practices under rabbinic authority. Rabbinic texts, preserved in the Mishnah, compiled c. 200 AD, demonstrate the codification of law, prayer, and ritual observance adapted to post-temple conditions. Despite dispersal and political upheaval, Jewish worship retained continuity through Torah study, Sabbath observance, and festivals within local synagogues. Throughout the 4th and 5th centuries AD, Jewish communities across the Roman Empire maintained ritual continuity, albeit in decentralized forms. Roman administrative records document synagogue activity, property ownership, and taxation of Jewish populations. Jewish law continued to guide religious, social, and civil practices, ensuring cohesion even in the absence of the temple. Christianity, from Jewish sect to widespread religion, 30 to 313 AD. Christianity emerged as a sect within 1st century Judaism. Historical documentation situates Jesus' ministry in 30 to 33 AD, with his earliest followers observing Torah law while gathering for teaching and communal meals in domestic settings, as reflected in Paul's letters, c. 50 to 60 AD. These early Jewish Christians maintained participation in synagogue worship, but gradually established separate house-based assemblies for instruction and ritual, including prayer, teaching, and the communal sharing of bread and wine. Following Jesus' death, the apostolic missions, particularly those of Paul, expanded Christianity to Gentile populations in Asia Minor, Greece, and Syria. The Council of Jerusalem, c. 50 AD, formalized a critical divergence. Gentile converts were not required to adhere fully to Torah law, including circumcision and dietary regulations. Paul's correspondence with early churches, including Galatians and 1 Corinthians, documents instructions for communal meals, leadership roles, and doctrinal instruction, establishing patterns for non-Jewish Christian communities. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD accelerated the institutional differentiation of Christianity. Jewish Christians continued to observe Torah and synagogue practices, whereas Gentile Christians increasingly adopted house-based assemblies independent of temple structures. Archaeological evidence from urban centers in Judea, Asia Minor, and Syria corroborates these patterns, demonstrating the adaptation of worship to domestic and later public spaces. From 70 to 313 AD, Christianity exhibited documented diversity. Jewish Christians, Gentile Christians, and Gnostic groups coexisted with distinct ritual practices and theological emphases. Leadership structures emerged, including bishops, episkopoi, elders, presbyteroi, and deacons, diakonoi, documented in Paul's letters and later sources such as the Didache, late 1st or early 2nd century AD. Worship included weekly gatherings on Sunday, baptismal rites, prayer, instruction, and communal meals. Roman records from Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and Suetonius document persecution, illustrating the clandestine nature of assembly before legalization. Catholicism, institutionalization, and hierarchical consolidation, 313, 5th century AD. The legalization of Christianity through the Edict of Milan, 313 AD, issued by Constantine and Licinius, allowed public worship, recovery of property, and legal recognition of clergy. Eusebius' Life of Constantine, c. 337 AD, and Lactantius' writings confirm that bishops were acknowledged by imperial authority and tasked with overseeing doctrine, liturgy, and administration. House-based assemblies transitioned into basilicas and other dedicated spaces, accommodating larger congregations and formalizing worship. The Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, codified doctrine in response to the Arian controversy, producing the Nicene Creed to standardize belief regarding the nature of Christ. The council also regulated ecclesiastical hierarchy, ordination of clergy, and sacramental observance, integrating regional assemblies into an increasingly coordinated system. Archaeological evidence from early basilicas, such as those in Nicaea and Rome, demonstrates the architectural adaptation to public and clerical oversight. Throughout the 4th and 5th centuries, Catholicism developed hierarchical governance. Bishops of major urban centers, particularly Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, assumed centralized authority over doctrine, administration, and ritual. Imperial edicts, including the Edict of Thessalonica, 380 AD, under Theodosius I, reinforced Nicene orthodoxy and established Christianity as the state religion. Councils, including those at Constantinople, 381 AD, and Ephesus, for 31 AD, documented doctrinal uniformity, regulation of festivals, and enforcement of canonical law. Catholic worship during this period reflected continuity with earlier Christian practices while incorporating public and hierarchical adaptations. Sunday assemblies, Eucharist, baptism, and communal prayer remained central, conducted under clerical supervision within basilicas. Liturgical manuals, including the Apostolic Constitutions, provided procedural instructions for rites, clerical duties, and communal administration. Bishops were responsible for doctrinal instruction, oversight of sacraments, and charitable functions, integrating religious, social, and administrative roles. Timeline comparison, key divergence points. 30 to 33 AD, Jesus' ministry. Early Christianity functions as a Jewish sect. Followers observe Torah law, temple festivals, and synagogue worship. House-based gatherings document early Christian instruction and communal meals. 50 AD, Council of Jerusalem. Gentile converts not required to follow Torah law. Formal divergence from Judaism begins. 70 AD, destruction of the Second Temple. Judaism reorganizes around the synagogue and rabbinic authority. Christian communities increasingly independent from temple-centered worship. 70 to 313 AD, early Christian diversity. Jewish Christians maintain Torah observance. Gentile Christians adopt decentralized assemblies. Leadership structures develop. Persecution influences practice. 313 AD, Edict of Milan. Christianity legalized. Public worship and clerical authority recognized. House-based assemblies expand into basilicas. 325 AD, Council of Nicaea. Nicene Creed codifies doctrine. Hierarchical authority standardized. Liturgical and sacramental practices formalized. 4th to 5th centuries AD, Catholic institutionalization. Bishops consolidate power, sacraments codified, canon law established. Imperial support reinforces centralization, worship standardized across the empire. This timeline illustrates the continuity and divergence of worship practices, organizational structures, and institutional authority. Judaism retained adherence to Torah law and decentralized synagogue-based observance following temple destruction. Christianity transitioned from a Jewish sect to a diverse, decentralized movement with house-based assemblies, eventually achieving legal recognition and structural consolidation. Catholicism emerged as the dominant institutional branch, centralizing leadership, codifying liturgy and sacraments, and integrating imperial authority into ecclesiastical governance. Conclusion: continuity and divergence in historical perspective. Historical evidence demonstrates that each tradition maintained continuity while diverging according to documented events. Judaism persisted as a pre-Christian faith structured around Torah law, synagogue worship, and rabbinic authority. Christianity emerged within Judaism, maintaining Jewish ritual initially, before adapting to Gentile contexts and decentralized assembly structures. Catholicism, formalized in the 4th to 5th centuries, codified doctrine, hierarchical authority, and ritual observance, achieving institutional cohesion within the Roman Empire. Archaeological remains, council records, letters, and Roman administrative documentation provide consistent chronological verification of these developments. The timeline comparison confirms that early Christian worship evolved in continuity with Jewish practices, adapted to legal and social circumstances, and ultimately consolidated under centralized authority as Catholicism. The distinctions among Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism are grounded in historically documented events, institutional development, and liturgical adaptation, providing a factual basis for understanding their divergence and continuity over 4 centuries. The historical trajectory of Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism demonstrates a documented sequence of continuity, divergence, and institutional consolidation spanning from the 1st century AD through the 5th century AD. This period is characterized by the gradual differentiation of Christianity from its Jewish roots, the adaptation of worship practices to changing political and social circumstances, and the formalization of hierarchical and doctrinal structures culminating in the emergence of Catholicism. Examining these developments within their chronological and historical context provides a comprehensive understanding of the distinctions between these religious traditions. Judaism, as documented prior to and following the 1st century AD, maintained a continuous religious identity centered on the Torah, sacrificial rites, and temple worship. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah, recorded in historical and archaeological sources, established the foundations of Jewish religious practice, including priestly authority, festival observance, and legal interpretation. By the 1st century AD, the Second Temple in Jerusalem served as the primary locus of worship and ritual, supported by the priestly class and administered under the high priest. Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish War, details the organization of Jewish religious life, noting the existence of multiple sects, including Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. These groups differed in their interpretation of the Torah, approaches to ritual, and engagement with Roman governance. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, documented by Josephus, marked a pivotal turning point for Judaism. The loss of centralized sacrificial worship necessitated the reorganization of religious life around synagogues and rabbinic authority. The Mishnah, compiled circa 200 AD, provides evidence of codified laws, prayers, and rituals adapted to post-temple circumstances. Despite political disruptions and dispersal, Jewish worship retained continuity through Torah study, Sabbath observance, and communal festival practices. Roman administrative records further document the persistence of Jewish communities across the empire, indicating the maintenance of religious and social cohesion. Christianity, emerging within this Jewish milieu, initially functioned as a sect adhering to Torah law and temple worship, while simultaneously introducing teachings attributed to Jesus of Nazareth. Historical sources, including Paul's letters, c. 50 to 60 AD, and contemporary accounts of early Christian gatherings, indicate that the earliest followers conducted worship in domestic assemblies, observing prayer, instruction, and communal meals. Jesus' ministry, dated 30 to 33 AD, represents the origin of these practices, with his followers remaining integrated into Jewish religious life, while also forming distinct groups for instruction and ritual observance. The divergence of Christianity from Judaism is historically documented through the missionary work of Paul and other apostles. The Council of Jerusalem, c. 50 AD, established that Gentile converts were not required to adhere fully to Torah law, including circumcision and dietary restrictions. This decision, documented in Acts 15 and Paul's letters, marks the formal differentiation between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. Following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, this divergence accelerated as Gentile Christian communities increasingly adopted independent worship structures, decentralized leadership, and domestic assemblies for teaching, prayer, and ritual meals. Archaeological evidence from Asia Minor, Syria, and urban centers across the Roman Empire supports the prevalence of house churches during this period. From 70 to 313 AD, Christianity was characterized by documented diversity. Jewish Christians maintained Torah observance and synagogue participation, while Gentile Christians developed local assemblies with appointed bishops, episkopoi, elders, presbyteroi, and deacons, diakonoi, to oversee instruction, communal resources, and ritual practice. Gnostic groups and other sects introduced alternative theological emphases, but mainstream documentation, including the Didache, late 1 SD, early 2nd century AD, and the letters of Ignatius of Antioch, c. 110 AD, indicates that worship consistently included communal prayer, instruction, and ritual meals. Roman records, including letters from Pliny the Younger, c. 112 AD, and accounts by Tacitus confirm sporadic persecution, influencing the clandestine nature of assemblies while documenting the presence and continuity of Christian communities. The legalization of Christianity through the Edict of Milan in 313 AD marked a transformative phase. Historical sources, including Eusebius' Life of Constantine and Lactantius writings, document the restoration of property, legal recognition of clergy, and freedom to practice religion openly. House-based assemblies gradually transitioned into larger basilicas and public spaces, accommodating growing congregations and enabling the codification of liturgical practice. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, convened by Constantine, established the Nicene Creed to unify doctrinal positions, particularly in response to the Arian controversy. The council also standardized the roles of bishops, presbyters, and deacons, codifying hierarchical structures and integrating local assemblies into coordinated provincial and imperial frameworks. The 4th and 5th centuries AD saw the emergence of Catholicism as a centralized, institutionalized branch of Christianity. Bishops in major urban centers, particularly Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, exercised consolidated authority over doctrine, ritual practice, and administration. Imperial edicts, including the Edict of Thessalonica, 380 AD, by Theodosius I, enforced Nicene orthodoxy and designated Christianity as the state religion, providing legal and social reinforcement for centralized ecclesiastical authority. Councils at Constantinople, 381 AD, and Ephesus, 31 AD, further codified doctrine, regulated the liturgical calendar, and formalized the administration of sacraments. Archaeological evidence from basilicas, including Old St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, construction begun 324 AD, and the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, c. 327 AD, confirms the adaptation of architecture to support public, hierarchical worship. Liturgical practices, while retaining continuity with earlier Christian worship, were formalized and standardized. Sunday assemblies became central, incorporating Eucharist, baptism, prayer, and reading of Scripture under clerical supervision. Baptism was conducted publicly in dedicated pools or fonts, integrating new converts into the community. The Eucharist maintained continuity with first-century communal meals, administered by ordained clergy according to prescribed liturgical forms. The apostolic constitutions and council canons provide documented procedures for these practices, illustrating continuity and adaptation over several centuries. By contrast, Judaism remained distinct in ritual and institutional organization. Synagogue-based worship, Torah study, and rabbinic authority continued to guide communal life. Observance of the Sabbath, dietary laws, and festivals maintained continuity with pre-Christian practices, while the destruction of the Second Temple necessitated adaptations to the absence of centralized sacrificial worship. Historical records confirm that Jewish communities persisted across the Roman Empire, maintaining religious cohesion and institutional continuity independent of Christian developments. The documented divergence between Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism is reinforced through chronological milestones. 30 to 33 AD, Jesus' ministry. Early Christianity exists as a Jewish sect observing Torah law and temple worship. 50 AD, Council of Jerusalem. Gentile converts exempt from full Torah observance. Formal divergence from Judaism begins. 70 AD, destruction of the Second Temple. Judaism reorganizes around rabbinic authority. Christian communities increasingly independent. 70 to 313 AD. Early Christian diversity. Jewish Christians, Gentile Christians, and other groups practice decentralized worship. Leadership structures develop. 313 AD. Edict of Milan. Legalization of Christianity. Public worship and clerical authority recognized. 325 AD. Council of Nicaea. Doctrinal unification and hierarchical codification. 4th to 5th centuries AD. Emergence of Catholicism. Bishops consolidate authority. Sacraments codified. Imperial recognition reinforces centralization. These documented events confirm that Judaism remained a distinct pre-Christian faith. Christianity emerged from Judaism but became an independent religion, and Catholicism developed as the institutionalized and hierarchical form of Christianity. Worship practices evolved from temple and synagogue-based rites in Judaism to domestic house assemblies and public basilicas in Christianity, with Catholicism codifying liturgy, sacramental rites, and leadership structures.